Good morning.
Good morning.
Dave, are you ready? Let's kick off.
All right, let's get rocking and rolling. Well, first things first, good morning, everybody. I really appreciate all of you taking some time to be here with us this morning. Here we're with our great friends and partners, Alert Logic, and we're going to talk to you a little bit about Security 101, just give you some awareness in today's world. It's a very threat-rich environment. There's a lot of bad stuff going on, but there's a lot of good stuff that we can do about it too. So we're going to go through and talk to you guys a little bit about who we are, both in Exanet and Alert Logic. We want to talk to you a little bit about the cyber world today, or the cybersecurity world today, and talk to you a little bit about some things that you can do to help protect yourselves, or help maybe identify some areas where you can strengthen your cybersecurity posture, so you can better protect your business, your data, your customers, so that we can all get back to doing what it is that we're good at. Let's go ahead to the next slide, Dan. So who we are. By the way, excuse me, one more thing I forgot, I apologize. This morning I have Dan Pittman with me from Alert Logic. Dan, why don't you say hi to everybody before we get rolling here?
Hey everyone, thanks Dave, no worries. Yeah, Dan Pittman, I work for Alert Logic, security bod for this call, and looking forward to getting into some detail with everyone.
Great, thanks Dan. So who we are. So Exanet's been around since 2000, and we like to call ourselves a full stack consulting services organization, IT consulting services organization. We'd like to bring everything to the table, from digital solutions and development all the way through the platforms that you need to be able to run those on, whether they're in the data center or the cloud, and then everything in between. And we bring our solutions from ideation and inception all the way through execution, production and go live, and then obviously right into maintenance and operations and management with managed services. And you can't do any of those things from top to bottom in this world unless you are secure and you understand what data you have and what risk you're taking on by absorbing data, whether it be from a B2B or from a consumer. It really doesn't matter. You have to make your senior leadership and business understand they need to have a risk framework in place and understand what their tolerances are and what legalities they have, so that you can do all of these great and wonderful things that we do and know what your responsibilities are. Go ahead and move on. So continuous value creation. So we like to talk about how we start with discovery. This, again, full stack. You're going to continue to hear this, right, from top to bottom. We like to start to discover. We want to do either onboarding or that get to know you phase, right? And we want to be able to manage through an engagement and a process with you, and then make sure that we are helping you engage in the marketplace the way that you need to be able to ultimately be successful, make money. We all enjoy doing that. And again, staying secure while we're doing all of those things. Go ahead, Dan. So I'm David Mahoney. I apologize. I'm an enterprise services architect here at Exanet. I've been here for just a little bit over a year now, most of which has been sitting in this room that you're looking at, because I started last February. I got to go in and be with all of my colleagues and coworkers for about a month, and then boom, we all had to go lock ourselves in our home. Luckily, my wife has made us a very nice home, and I'm comfortable here. But I kind of miss seeing all my friends and colleagues. They're very great people, and Exanet is a great place to be. Dan, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself before we get going?
Yeah, so product marketing naturally, so a sort of security expert for working with our customers and partners and internal teams to make sure everyone can get the best out of the solution. A little bit longer tenure at Alert Logic than Dave has at Exanet. I do remember the office more clearly and sometimes miss it. but it's just as good. I think we can at least all still interact and see each other and have good conversations. So I think, which is a big part of what I enjoy doing. So that's all good. And of course, if you don't know about Alert Logic, we're a managed security services provider. So everything that Dave's just talked about is very similar to our approach and how we like to think about the value that we deliver, just with a focus on security.
All right, great. So we're here, like I said, we want to talk to you guys about what's going on in the environment, and I'm going to turn this over to Dan and let him run you through. But one of the key messages, as a managed services provider and as a full stack IT consulting services provider, Anexanet is committed to providing the right value to our customers in the right places strategically, and we can't do that without a cybersecurity mindset. And so we've brought Alert Logic into our partnership family, and they into us into theirs, because we know that this is a valuable thing for our customers. And the reason it's valuable is because there's a lot of risks and concerns out there that Dan is going to walk you guys through. Take it away, Dan.
Thank you. Right, so I think the first thing I like to do in all of these kind of sessions is set the scene a little bit, paint a picture for what we see through our lens on all of our partner and customers' estates and their workloads, their servers and things that we monitor, but also out in the market. There's lots of firms that do some great research. And so to sort of set the scene, I think one of the challenges is that IT in many organizations becomes necessarily more complex, and with whatever kind of strategy you have, your business needs to move forward and it needs to innovate. And therefore, you're going to introduce change and complexity into the environments, and that's really one of the things that drives security, that drives the security challenge. Naturally, if we could all just have a nice box that everything we care about, the data that we have to worry about, lives in and nobody ever looks at it, then it would be super secure, right? But that's not really the reality of things. And every study out there, when companies are asked about what their biggest challenge is, it's normally the security of their data, the security of their customers and their intellectual property and those things that really comes to the forefront. And I don't think we need to sort of labor that point too much. What's interesting, though, I think from my point of view in security is that quite often, if we look at the world stage as far as security goes, not everyone still pays it, I think, the credit that it necessarily needs. The need to have a focus on security, to start and finish everything you do with security in mind, doesn't necessarily pan out. So you can see that on the last slide, we talked about lots of people having multi-cloud strategies, but actually not a lot of people sort of focus their security strategy into the multi-cloud world. And from a reduction in impact of breach point of view, automation has a big impact, but then not a lot of people are actually doing much about it. I think it's fair to say that most people focus their efforts, their automation, their practices into delivery of their application to the end customer or their end users. That necessarily means that sometimes security gets left behind. That's our mission at Alert Logic, to make sure it doesn't, and that really all of our joint customers don't have to worry too much about it in detail. And it's the two right-hand statistics that really stand out here for me. The left-hand one, informative, I think. Most breaches include customer data that within the studies that we have. And it's interesting, obviously, that then you can pin a cost per record to that. And so I think that's a useful way of looking at it, because it scales. Doesn't matter what size of organization you are and you work in, the number of customer records you have is a good sort of scaling point for how much a breach might cost you in the end. And of course, that cost involves lots of different things, whether it's the effort required to mitigate it, to block it, to remediate from it and rebuild afterwards. But also, obviously, depending on what region you're in and what part of the world you're in, there are lots of regulatory costs as well. And these two really stats on the right-hand side highlight why it's so important to focus on two key areas in security. I like that from the study, it said that nearly 50% of breaches are caused by a system glitch. being a security professional, I'm not sure what they mean. I suspect that might be an excuse by an engineer that there was a glitch. But generally speaking, either we're looking at insecure configurations in systems, whether that's someone made a mistake, or whether it's the way that system is built or the way it's configured by default and they haven't really assessed it properly. And many, slightly more than 50% caused by actually malicious actors. So, hackers fundamentally getting into their systems. And I think this is an important stat to understand, because many people still consider security through obscurity to be a real world thing. And I always liken it, it's a little bit tongue in cheek, but people think it's like Where's Waldo, that you need to find, you need to be found, and it's difficult to find you if you've got some kind of website or something publicly presented, but actually it's more like a Where's Waldo convention on the internet where everyone's Waldo, and you can quite easily be found. And that's why, as I said, it's so important to focus on the two sides of security. One, on pre-breach, what can you do to make sure that you address everything, you reduce the likelihood of attack as much as possible, but also you assume breach and you focus on what will you do in the event of an attack, and in the event of a successful attack, importantly. Many people, many organizations will focus on one and the other, and it's really our mission together with Exanet to make sure we can focus on both sides of this to reduce any cost or impact to our customers. Just to go into a little bit more detail. So interesting study, but folks really showing that those of you who understand what the security landscape is like already will see that things haven't necessarily changed in the past, let's say 10 years. Web applications are still the top breach attack vector. Naturally, they're publicly presented, and following not far after is humans fundamentally, so they're end user systems. Of course, the reason that web applications are top is that, like I say, they're publicly presented, but you can also then interrogate those programmatically. And that is really what drives such a low time to compromise. This was around 3,000 breaches. Now it's from a report that focused on cyber espionage, but these are statistics from general breaches across the time period. And this is largely driven by automation. So, the number of people that are affected by big nation state attacks is low, and you're not necessarily going to be targeted by an attacker specifically, but really all they have to do is cast a wide net, scan the internet effectively, find vulnerable systems, and automatically, using scripts, attack them. And that's why the time to compromise is so low in the minutes and such a high end of the scale. But I guess the worrying thing in the security industry, or for security professionals, is that ultimately that time to discovery is at the other end of the graph. And so it's not as much of a spike, but that sort of concern for us is that overall, we're not seeing across all industries and across all companies a significant shift on this time to discovery. So how long does it take an organization to discover they've been breached? There are other statistics sort of on the right of this, in the sense of how long it takes them to sort of clean up. That's a flatter graph sometimes, but of course it all depends on how quickly you can discover that attacker. And that's one of the reasons that Alert Logic focus on both sides. As I said, what can we do to reduce the likelihood, but how can we detect those attacks quickly? And I'm just going to explain a little bit about how we do that. So,
hey, Dan, real quick, it's actually kind of a shame we don't have that time to recovery graph, because I think that there's an interesting duality there. Breaches happen within minutes or even seconds occasionally. The discovery of the breach in this particular case takes weeks and months in most cases. But because people have been perpetually so bad at cybersecurity, we've gotten very good at cleaning them up after the fact, which is why that graph is flatter, which I think speaks volumes to how we need to change our mindset in the world today, don't you?
Yeah, I agree. I guess it's like having a house party, right? And you have the house party, and there's all this sort of mess that gets made, and we're fine at clearing it up the next day. But ultimately, it'd be great if everyone sort of worked out how to respect the house in the first place. That's how I kind of think about it. Lots of analogies in security we always use to try and explain things, but I think that's where we can get better. Obviously, if we can get better at discovery, we can leverage those skills that we've got in cleanup to shift this graph to the left. And I think that's where one, automation can play a part in pushing the previous graph towards the right, but also bringing this to the left. But really having that focus on both sides of hygiene, security hygiene, and breach detection. That's why it's so critical. Ideally, we want all the graphs to be as flat as possible, I guess. So yeah, how do we do that? How do we bring things sort of forward in that second graph? We use in security several frameworks, and one of them is the cyber kill chain. It's been around for quite a long time. It's loosely obviously based around what you will do as a human being to break into something, and we can draw parallels with any kind of attack or breach into physical and computer systems, but it's very useful to understand the steps that attackers go through. I will draw a sort of slightly cheesy parallel with something that maybe there's a pun in here around Trojans and malware, but ultimately to try and sort of bring it out of the security language for just a minute, imagine you're the Greeks, you want to break into Troy, obviously, and so you understand that the Trojans love their horses, right? They have horses everywhere, and so that's your reconnaissance. You build the horse, you get in it, you park it outside their gate, and if you can, if you discover the spy in the first place and you stop that information getting out, then obviously you can break the kill chain really early on. If you recognize that it's a trap in the first place, and that there's a lot of parallels there with phishing attacks, obviously, and don't pull it inside, then you can stop the breach. And it's really at that delivery exploitation phase that sits in the middle, that boom on the picture earlier where we have pre-breach and post-breach. That's kind of where that sits in the kill chain. It's not always linear, but if we can have as few vulnerabilities as possible, of course, and also detect things like vulnerability scans that aren't us or one of our suppliers doing it, and block those, make them so they can't get through, and detect those vulnerabilities in the first place, then we can stop things early on. But one of the biggest challenges in security is there are a lot of unknowns. Those of you who know about statistics, security really lives in a standard deviation. So lots of stuff in the middle of the graph is unknown, and it's security professionals' job to understand what's happening there. So we can move up to the left of the kill chain. So how does that work in the real world? We highlighted that web applications are one of the significant attack vectors earlier, and I've touched on this briefly. So just to go through it quickly, if they want to exploit a web application server, they're going to first run a script that will scan the internet for vulnerable sites. Often they'll have what's called a dropper server. They'll have their own infrastructure which will contain the payload and the malware. Their script will go off, pull that from the dropper server so they're not exposing their IP, and send it off to the vulnerable server that they've discovered, install something. So that might be a web shell, for example. A web shell is basically a remote access web page that they can drop onto a web server that gives them almost unlimited access. It's something common that we see when we take on new customers into the and start to understand their systems. Then we'll have seen attempts at least to exploit web shells. And then they go on and they get to their action on objectives, as we say, and within the kill chain, but it just basically means that once they're in, and if we think about that time to detection, they're there for quite some time potentially, if we haven't done a good enough job. At Logic are proud, I think, of our detection time, and that's why we guarantee a very quick time to detection, SLA, on escalation through our partners. But like I say, some of it is not linear. So some of it's done in advance. And this is partially why we say such a quick, that graph that showed 50 minutes or seconds. It's that a whole bunch of this kill chain is now automated all the way through to installation and their script will pop up, give them a nice list. If any of you have done any scripting, you know you have some kind of output from that script, and it will show them exactly which servers have been exploited by the script, and they can just go ahead at their leisure in some cases, looping through them looking for something interesting. It's why we say now that compared to when it was invented, the kill chain is more often than not very compressed. It looks like these stages are all the same, but in reality, they're not. So the goal, as I say, is to break that chain as early as possible, hopefully at the reconnaissance phase. But if we focus on all of these stages and collect the right data, network data, log data, user behavior, then we can target the right place in the kill chain, stop the attack, hopefully, or the very worst case, detect it and get the attacker out of the environment before they cause any real damage. And that's why it's useful to kind of focus on things in these two buckets, I think, pre-breach and post-breach. So we put effort almost equally into both. And so the point is to get scale throughout that process, have great security hygiene, use the right prevention technologies, but it's really more and more acknowledged in the security industry now that no level of prevention, no level of investment will prevent 100% of attacks. So we have to make sure we have the right detection expertise and technologies. Someone I used to work with in threat intelligence used to call security the war of the toys, and in some cases that's true. You know, as far as the detection technologies and the analytics tools and user behavior, and as we make advances in the security detection side of things, then the attackers are also making their advances. So we have to make sure we can innovate, and I think that's why, for me anyway, once upon a time, I should have said I was a customer of AlertLogix, and what drew me in is that the platform, the technologies are built in-house, developed in-house in response to our customers' technology, but in response to the threat landscape needs as well. So we don't need to wait for somebody else to build a new detection technology. We're going to be able to innovate that and make sure we've got the right technologies and the right people integrated into them to make sure that they work and are efficient. But of course,
real quick, Dan.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry, sir. So just real quick, this is actually a very important concept, right? The war of the tools. Okay, the people are investing in tools in an effort to create this defense in depth strategy that we always hear about, right? The more walls and barriers that you have between you and the threat, right? Whether that be wherever it is. You create this defense in depth strategy. And so this creates that war of the tools type of mentality. I just have to keep investing in the new thing that's going to protect me, the new security camera, the new antivirus, the new web application firewall, whatever, pick a topic. But then we look at breaches like with SolarWinds recently, right? All of these companies, major companies and government organizations that we are all very well aware of and familiar with and have an impact on us, at least annually in some cases, are attacked from the inside because of something in the technology supply chain, right? Something that people don't even really think about outside, that stops at the CIO, right? Normally, people don't think about that. My monitoring tool, right? Somebody gets into their development chain and inserts some malicious code. And now it's inside of your network via a patch that was probably approved and deployed. Well, not probably, it was approved and deployed in all of these different places and organizations. And then it attacked them from the inside. And I guarantee you that these people have, some of them almost unlimited budgets for all of the war of the tools that you could possibly want. And it still happened to them because the world hasn't adjusted to this threat-rich environment yet. And if you're not using the tools that you have, but then also having eyes on glass, which is where an Exonet and AlertLogix, that's why we are having this conversation. You have to have that eyes on glass and that threat intelligence. There's got to be some human interaction. The tools are not there to keep us as secure as we think we should be.
It's a great point. I would say that security is a human challenge, and I think, and that's what you're fundamentally saying, and it's different to some normal IT, some normal technology problems that we face. I used to work in IT operations a lot, and you sometimes feel like you're under attack because things break, or a disk fills up or at the wrong moment and things like that. But those are just, not to belittle them, because they can be hard to manage, but they are technology challenges, and there are technology answers to them if they're well implemented. But security is different. Ultimately, it's another human being that's innovating and enjoying their job to make other human beings' lives difficult and to exploit them effectively. And that's why it's a human challenge. It's not purely a technology one. The technology sits in the middle and is pivotal, but you need great expertise feeding into it that Alert Logic provide, and you need great expertise to understand it and work together as we provide with AnextNet together. So I think that's the key bit for me. It's the security sort of sits in the middle. It's not the solution of itself. So how do we plan for success? How do we make sure that we can get over this hurdle that hopefully I haven't labored too much? And I just kind of wanted to share two principles that I use whenever I'm going into a project, not a security project, a new application, let's say, the implementation of a new system or anything really. The two security principles that I try and apply to them as part of the requirements gathering phase. As I said, you want security in the beginning. And they're based on two phrases in security, quite simple to understand. One is you can't secure what you can't see. Now this refers obviously to visibility of new things, assets, but also the software, the vulnerabilities that lie within it, the changes that are happening in the environment. And so we can have a principle. And my architecture background, I always want to have some well-phrased principles that you can always go back to. So when you're making decisions during a project or during the implementation of something or a new solution, you go back to and say, are we adhering to our principles? And so we can take you can't secure what you can't see and turn it into the principle you can see on the screen. And ultimately the goal of this one is to reduce that likelihood, as I said. And the other one that you won't always hear security providers say out loud, although it's quite common to talk about it within, for security professionals, is assume breach. It's becoming more common in the security industry. You'll see vendors out there that, their marketing will say, we stop all the hackers, and I think it's kind of, not duplicitous, but it's unfair to make that promise because I don't think anybody can. And that's shown time and time again. Look at the SolarWinds example that Dave mentioned. If you look back, most security vendors have had some kind of problem in their time. And so we have to assume breach. And it doesn't mean we're going to be breached. It doesn't mean we're going to necessarily get damaged by an attacker. But if we do assume breach as a principle, then it means we're recognizing that we need to do everything we can to minimize that impact of successful attack and be prepared. And that means
I don't think I'm going to get into a car wreck, but statistics show that I will.
Right, you're going to have your airbags. You're going to want all the right things in your car, but you hope it never happens. Yeah, that's a good point. So, Dave, we can talk about some strategic frameworks, right, that we can use to leverage to get into the detail. Principles are all very well and good, but you want to have something to measure what you're doing against. And the NIST framework is a really useful one, I always find. It gives us some nice pillars to really focus on that are aligned with that pre-breach, post-breach thing that I talked about, that we need to identify things, we need to protect, detect, respond, and recover. And I think for me, it's then about getting into that detail. And we've listed out some things here that are very important. They might not always apply, you might not be using containers. You might not necessarily have endpoints within your remit, as in desktops and laptops and things. But the point being is that if you can use these frameworks to list out all the things you can think of that are risks or things you need to care about within your solution stack, within your workloads, your environments, then it's a way of at least starting on the right feet, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, one of the biggest challenges I think that I hear the most, and I'm assuming people probably on the phone too, if depending on their background, where do you start, right? What is my senior manager? So hypothetically, my senior management doesn't have a risk assessment, right? We're collecting data from different sources, B2B, consumer, whatever. But what is my risk level? What are my requirements and the legalities that I have to, and the regulatory requirements that I have to follow? Where do you get started? Well, here's a NIST framework. But there's a ton of things in the NIST framework, right? The common controls in NIST for just general cybersecurity is 171 or 170 some odd controls long. Well, I'm a small organization potentially. Do I really need to pay the money to meet all of these controls? And some of the things they ask for are very specific. Not necessarily. And that's why you need to have an understanding of what your risk is. Cybersecurity is about risk. You measure your risk, you understand what your regulatory requirements are with your legal people, right? And then your business owners, your data owners, your senior management are accountable and responsible to set the policy and standards for what you need to do to protect you from those risks, and what the budgetary requirements are and everything else that they're going to spend and invest to mitigate those risks. And then you take action. It is not your responsibility as a cybersecurity professional to complete a risk assessment and then sign it. That is your senior management job. They are supposed to tell you, but you need to help coach them and define it for them. And that's where coming to an Exonet and talking to people like Dan and myself, we can help. We can get you into the right NIST cybersecurity, the right parts of the NIST cybersecurity framework, and then take it from there.
I think one thing you're right, the NIST is deep, but one thing I kind of like about it is that it's a bit of a middle ground. It's not, there's say the MITRE ATT&CK framework, which is massive, and even more so doesn't apply to everybody. It takes, it could take you months to go through each one and work out whether or not that applies to you. It's more detailed. It's for security detection professionals. NIST is kind of in the middle. There are others that are higher level, but I always say, one, try and pick one and stick to it, and sort of advocating for the NIST, but also look for ways of measuring yourself continually as well. One of the things Alert Logic does is provide obviously PCI scanning and ASV, etc. But we'll try and provide reporting through our partners and through our console for customers to measure themselves against different frameworks. And I think the big value of that is when the auditor comes, hopefully you can show them a report and your day is a lot quicker than it might have been in the past. But the other side is that continual measurement. I think one of the problems with compliance generally is that it's an annual thing. It only happens once a year, and then you find a bunch of things. You can spend the rest of the year trying to fix them. For me, compliance is the outcome of great security rather than the requirements into it, which is why these frameworks are sometimes better than sort of picking a compliance mandate. But yeah, NIST framework, and we'll talk about that again in a minute. So just to call out one of the really first things you have to do when it comes to understanding your security risk posture requirements is about the data. I will, whenever I'm entering a security project, the first thing I'll do is want to understand what security boundary requirements we have. So you can think about this as well. I have a development system and a production system. Well, now I know I have two security boundary requirements I have because I'm going to keep those separate. Or you might have one environment that requires compliance because of the data within it, and another that doesn't because it has different types of data. So identifying all the different data repositories, understanding their classifications, even if you don't want to adopt a third party, coming up with your own specific classification levels that you can use to make decisions around. I think it's almost the most important thing within security, because otherwise you can't then make good decisions about what needs what level of security. Because then you can go on and work out what essential best practices you've got. If you establish that actually the most secure data we have is personally identifiable, not say sensitive personally identifiable, then you can start to understand, what regulatory or government or internal, maybe parent company best practices you need to adhere to, because you understand that the most sensitive data you might have is, say, a customer name and email address. You don't have their social security number. We don't have anything else. And I think we've touched on this a little bit, and you can see that second row in the sort of breach type graph that we showed really early on was about human beings. Really, it was about desktops and laptops and things like that. And so making sure everyone's aware of how important security is, but what to do about it as well. And that really doesn't just apply to those desktops and laptops. It'll apply to developers, DevOps teams, infrastructure teams, everyone, from the soup to nuts, the start to finish of your organization's journey is critical. I always think about the story about NASA, where everyone needed to know the mission, and that was their focus. Everyone knew the mission, whether it's from the astronaut to the cleaners. Everybody understood the mission and could explain what the mission was. And a lot of the time, our mission in business is to make money, but really we need to understand that also it's to maintain that ability to make money, and part of that is security. So we can understand that we've got some essential best practices we need to
and a positive reputation, hopefully, while you're doing it.
Right. Yes. I don't want to beat them up too much, but something like SolarWinds, that their whole thing is about security, or at least a big part of their business. That that reputational impact can equally happen to another organization. So I wanted to share another framework. This one's super important as well. This is about responsibility. And so, if you work in IT, I guess most of you do, then you'll know about RACI matrices. We've all worked with them, right? So we understand responsibility. We understand that some people are responsible for things, and there are other types of responsibilities. And so initially, when I started on my journey to the cloud, I don't know how long ago it was, 10 years or something like that, I thought, well, why is this such a big deal? The cloud shared responsibility model specifically. And part of the reason was that there was a misconception. There's a misconception that it was like handing off the security of, say, if you have a data center and you have a colo or you have a rack in it, then you've given away the responsibility and someone else manages that responsibility for locking the doors at night, for example, or letting people into the room. And there is an aspect of that when we move into the cloud and we use other systems. But there is still a huge amount of things that we're responsible for as customers. And I guess what it boils down to is the thing that you own, that you put in the box, the application, the user configurations, etc., are always going to end up as your responsibility. And so this is a logic graphic that we've kind of built out to try and explain the things you need to do at those different levels. So, if we use a platform, we still want to collect the logs. We still need to analyze them and understand the access to them. If we build servers within an environment, then we still need to make sure that we do the same on that we understand their vulnerabilities, the access to them, etc. And I think it's just one of the goals of this, and why it's still important, is it's emphasizing that no matter who we work with, generally speaking, but especially with all the cloud providers, they will take a set of responsibilities off your hands, but a large portion of them are still the customer's responsibility, in effect. And why does it matter? Why are we talking to you about this? Well, our goal is to let you focus on your business. Alert Logic and Exonet's goal is to let you focus on the things that make money, that build the business, that drive revenue. And more often than not, the things that you need to do in your business strategy are not aligned with the skills required to manage security and build out security practices and build security technologies. Those don't add to the bottom line, they're a direct cost. And so you can see that within this graphic, Alert Logic and Exonet together can take a lot of that responsibility off your hands.
Yeah, so there's some serious value here. Regardless of where you're at in your maturity of your cybersecurity program, there's stuff that you have to know that you have to be able to do, right? You've got to be able to stay secure by patching. The reason software vendors do patching is because they're continuously updating and adding new features and adding code. And then that code, they don't always want to always wait for that to be 100% fleshed out before they release it to the wild, which isn't necessarily the right thing to do, but they do it. And then they go back and they test it more, and they have customers provide them feedback, and then they go and they continuously improve, and they try to secure those holes that they've released into the wild, or that people have found a way to exploit. So there's that. But then there's all this other stuff. There's threat detection and endpoint monitoring and access management and identity control. There's log analysis, right? Do you really want to make the investment, which, by the way, can go anywhere from as small as $100,000 all the way up to $500,000, to build out a SOC and a security information and event management system, right? And even try to build a cybersecurity program around that before you've even really done a risk analysis? And do you really need to do it? Why? Everything is moving to as a service. And the reason that we brought our two great companies together is because we can do this for you as a service and give you all of that, take out all the confusion of that death by tool or war of the tools, as Dan said, right? And remove a lot of that, provide you strategic direction and guidance that's based on right sizing to your organization and your requirements and your risk and the tolerances therein, and then providing services just like those companies that have unlimited budgets but don't implement them well. We can give you those services at an affordable monthly cost and take all of this off of your plate and be successful from day one. So we are accelerating your maturity from 0 to beyond hero, as far as I'm concerned. Okay, again, it's not risk-free. We're not going to stop every threat, but we are going to give you a defense in depth strategy, as well as the monitoring and management and eyes on glass expertise behind the scenes to know and not be on the right side of that graph in terms of discovery of a breach. We want to move you to the left side of that graph as far as we can. And that's why we brought our two great companies together, and we fill out the shared responsibility, not only in the cloud, but also in the data center, which I think is very important.
Yeah, it's a great point. I think it's partly about knowledge, and it's about the understanding of two major disciplines in IT. One of those is security. And when I worked in IT, I would always say that there are as many jobs and disciplines and roles within IT than there are in the rest of business as a whole. And as I moved into security, I realized that was true of security as a subset of IT. And I think for me, it was always about, well, who understands the application, the business need, the business requirements for our customers? It's our partners, and it's partners like Exonet. And then Alert Logic add that security understanding of the landscape, the different things that we need to develop and integrate with and understand to make sure that this just gets filled out. And like I say, our customers can just focus on, making money at the end of the day, which is what we're all interested in, providing great services to our customers, to their customers. So we wanted to dig into those a little bit and make sure that we kind of not just leave it as some words on a diagram. So to start off, one of the things that's obviously important is securing your code. We've touched on a provider that kind of people have brought in their software and sort of inherited a vulnerability, but that can happen in all sorts of places. I think one of the most shocking from a sort of security professional point of view are some of the plugins that are out there. So one of the surprising stories, I think this was the year before last, was that there was I think it was a WordPress plugin that was available to download from the marketplace that had been purchased 10, 12 months earlier by a hacker group. They had installed a backdoor into it and left it on the marketplace for people to download. And when we started investigating, because we discovered this, we realized there had been tens of thousands of downloads of this plugin and installations of it into businesses' WordPress sites that were maybe used for e-commerce purposes or used for registration or marketing purposes. And so all of this hacking group had effectively a backdoor into tens of thousands of people's web applications. And that's where SecDevOps can come into play, and making sure that you've scanned everything, and not just that, well, this came from a legitimate marketplace, or this looks legitimate, this piece of software, but you've actually tested it. That's why it's so important. Some of you may have heard the acronym place DevSecOps, and I always put Sec first. And there's a reason for that we have to start with security. Adding this other acronym to the sort of DevOps implies an order of things that DevOps doesn't, but it's still about those three groups working together towards a joint outcome of being better operationally, better from a delivery point of view, and better from a security point of view. I wish
Some
I could
developers just rolled over in their grave.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. But I think ultimately it's just the requirements are the requirements, and security of the requirements are part of the requirements, right? I used to be a developer, but it was a long time ago, and I dread to think the security of the web applications I built in my late teens and my early 20s. Access management is critical, right? I think it's sort of next to, if you're building code, you're building applications, then access management is a key part of that. And you can see here there's a theme around defining it, making sure you understand the least privilege approach, what the roles and responsibilities are. You try and simplify it as much as possible, but you continually assess it as well. And there are some good practices we call out here that you can adhere to. But these are, drilling into those sort of most important bits of that shared responsibility that Alert Logic and Annexnet help you do together. I think is worth doing, just to call out. And these are not complete lists, right, Dave? These are just sort of some of the more important things I think we need to call out to people that are
Low-hanging fruit.
Low-hanging fruit. Yeah.
If you call me and you haven't done a few of these things first, you should be ashamed of yourselves.
Yes. Patch management is very important. I think the numbers, there's two sort of statistics that call out why patch management for me is so important. If we look at the NVD, the National Vulnerability Database, I think it's 1,000, it's more than 1,000 a week. It might even be 1,000 a day. I should have looked this up before we started this, but the numbers are serious as far as how many new vulnerabilities there are a day. And the time between a new vulnerability being disclosed or discovered, and then attackers out there learning and understanding how to exploit that vulnerability, can be as short as a week. And so there's two things that you need to do about that. One is, hopefully shorten our patch life cycle, which when I was in IT operations probably averaged about 4 weeks. But the other one is really understand which ones are exploitable. And that's where this security expertise comes in from Alert Logic, I think, is that we identify critical vulnerabilities that are exploitable by attackers, not just new ones that people are aware of, and make sure that we inform our partners and they can inform their customers. So from a log management point of view, a lot of the time, log management falls into the compliance bucket. Okay, I've collected my logs, I stored them, I can show an order to that, and that ends there. It's a box ticking exercise. But the first point here is the most important. Logs give us great information to monitor for malicious activity, and they can give us a way around technological challenges as well. So one of the best places for web application detection is on the network. But sometimes, certainly with more modern encryption technologies, you can't always see that traffic. And so logs give us a way of doing, for Alert Logic anyway, machine learning analysis for web logs, and we can detect threats there as well. So that defense in breadth strategy to make sure we have the right visibility and the ways of detecting threats is really critical. So making sure you've got a robust logging strategy, but you're doing something with those logs is what's important. And we're going to come back to the NIST framework here, right, Dave?
Yeah. So I mean, this kind of we're trying to summarize a few things, and that is, cybersecurity is not easy, but it doesn't have to be hard. People tend to hear the word cybersecurity, and I think that there's a little knot in the pit of their stomach, you know, and they're not quite sure how the conversation is going to go, and they're worried that people are going to start asking them questions that they don't have answers to. It doesn't need to be that way. It's a very simple concept. We're all people, right? And there's always going to be somebody smarter in the room, and you're not always going to be that smarter person, and that's okay. But what matters is knowledge and understanding, and it's my job not only to be a continuous learner, but to also take what I learn and pay it forward, right? And cybersecurity is a penchant of mine, and it has been for almost 10 years. You know, if my cybersecurity were a beard, it might look like Dan's. I'm just kidding. He keeps it very trim. That's not a 10-year beard, but sorry, Dan, I had to do it. But it's my job and people like me to pay it forward. But the easiest way to do that is to take these NIST framework gap assessments, right? These organizations like NIST have put together fantastic amounts of data that have been developed over the years, right? I mean, since the 60s, and well, not NIST since the 60s, but just move on with me, and measure you against these frameworks, right? What is right for you, and then pick out the things in the framework that are most important and rank them according to what risks exist for your business. So it's not just here's all the things you do bad. No, that's not the goal here. Okay, the goal is to say, where is your risk? Does your senior leadership and senior management understand those risks? Do they agree? Have we made that clear? Are we now given the funding and the level of responsibility and call to action to go and mitigate those risks based on what we find? So we can help you frame that conversation if you're having trouble because people don't take cybersecurity seriously. Or maybe people take cybersecurity so seriously because they have a cybersecurity expert on staff that now you have security and obscurity. People can't access anything, right? And it's, you know, it's a user experience nightmare or a consumer experience nightmare for your internal employees. And it's our job to help wrap all that up into a very pretty package, metaphorically and actually, I guess, given the deliverables, I think are very pretty. But and help you move the ball forward. Create a cybersecurity program that's right sized to your organization, that has the right tools, that has the right mechanisms, and that has the right buy-in from your senior management so that you're all doing the same thing. And this NIST framework gap assessment is a very, very effective, fast way to get a baseline of where you are in terms of cybersecurity maturity today, what gaps you may have balanced against your risk and what's right for your organization, and then a roadmap, a very specific roadmap that says these are the things that you should do and we can do together over the short, mid, and long term. making it simple. It can't get any more simple than that. It's like holding the kid's hand and walking them through the park for a really nice sunny day. I have kids. I can't help it. Everything goes back to a kid in the park.
Yeah. We're in the UK here, we're in pretty much full lockdown. So some of the parks are still closed, sadly.
Oh,
The ones with the swings and stuff anyway, but there's still plenty of nice green spaces to walk in. And actually it's a sunny day today for once. So.
Well, let's hope they can get outside soon.
Yeah.
We're coming up on about 5 minutes here, Dan, just FYI.
Thank you. I love that NIST framework slide, and partly because it's really, outcome driven, right? And the focus first on interviews, more, you see in my past, I think the most common question that I would have when I would go and talk to customers is, how do I work out where my gaps are? How do I work out what I need to do to, fill those gaps? And that's what that's about. You've got to make sure you understand the business and the people and have those interviews, and then really assess it and build a roadmap. And that's why I love that approach. And using a framework like NIST, and you saw in there the Center for Internet Security Controls as well. These are, let's not reinvent the wheel. And I think that's what's really important, is that expertise leverages, robust frameworks, robust things to move things forward. And in the end, I guess what you end up with, depending on what those gaps are, is a security toolkit. How can you prioritize patches? How often do you do penetration testing or need to? Which preventative technologies are important, etc. And I think that's what the outcome of any good security program, security discovery ends up with, is these are all the things that, and it normally kind of looks like this, I think, right? So yeah, a few resources we thought we'd throw at you. We've got some resources, obviously the NIST is thrown up here, MITRE is good. Exploit DB is one I always call out. I used to call it Street View for hackers, because basically on Exploit DB, that's where a lot of the new vulnerabilities get posted. But if you're interested in security and how it works, you'll actually find proof of concept code that attackers and pen testers, red teams have uploaded onto there. It wouldn't always work, but it's a very useful resource, and there's some quite interesting stuff up there. One of the things they have on there, which is one of those interesting tidbits, are these things called Google Docs, and these are basically Google search strings that you can enter to find systems that are vulnerable to the vulnerability that's on the site. And that's why I call it Street View for hackers, because ultimately you can literally just Google looking for servers that are exploitable. Now, you need some expertise to do it, but that was one of the things that really opened my eyes about how accessible things are these days compared to 10, 15 years ago for the attackers out there. And I think that's us. I don't think we've had any chat going on. Have you seen any questions come in, Dave?
No, I don't think so.
No. I think we're good, and we're nearly at the top of the hour.
I feel like we timed that pretty well.
Total accident.
So, just to use our time here, one of the things that people ask me a lot, right, is again, I feel daunted. All right, if they're not a cybersecurity expert and they're, IT, and this is CTOs, CIOs, it all depends, right? The world has gotten crazy. It's just a very threat-rich environment. Where do I start, right? Well, if you're interested in trying to get that cybersecurity program off the ground, right, let's establish a baseline. Give us a call. Let's set that baseline. Let's understand what are you doing? What are your public applications? What data are you collecting? And then what do we think and you think together that the risks associated with those are? And then from there we come up with a plan. It doesn't have to be daunting. It's a very simple Q&A. It's amazing how much we can get accomplished actually within 2 phone calls, right? I did an engagement a few weeks ago with a customer. I did a very quick and dirty vulnerability scan, external only, right? And came up with a list of, here's the stuff that you have on the internet that responds, And this is the good and bad stuff that I got back from the tool that I used. And that was very helpful, right? We went back and made some ops people a little angry, but they're working on it. And then, you know, I met with some of their ops people and some service providers, and just asked some very straightforward questions, right, about, you know, patching and antivirus and vulnerability. And just from those two interactions, you know, we came up with a very small subset of things, and then obviously balancing against what they do and the kind of data that they collect and things. You know, we just came up with some very quick actions to help really improve where they are today, before we start really digging deeper and taking care of some of that low-hanging fruit. But that low-hanging fruit is going to make a big difference. So it doesn't matter where you start. What matters is that you start. That was a long way around to get there, but that was the point.
I think that's a perfect point to end on, to be honest. You just got to start.
All right. Well, listen, everybody, and Dan, thank you so much for joining us today and doing this presentation with me. I really appreciate it. And to all of you out there, please, if you're in the Northeast in Pennsylvania like I am, stay warm and dry because it's snowing like crazy, and enjoy the rest of your day. And I hope that you all have a blessed weekend.
Thanks, everyone.
Take care, Dan.